Hi everybody, welcome to English 221, Introduction to Shakespeare. And my name is Lillian Ruiz. I'm the instructor for the class. And as some of you might know, this course was not originally scheduled to be an online class, so I apologize to those of you who wanted to take it in person. Though what I'm going to try to do with this class is to duplicate as much as possible as in terms of what we would have done in person. And if you are interested in an in-person class with me, I am offering a medium popular culture class in person on Wednesday evenings, and it happens to be focused on the theme of horror film. So if you're a horror film buff, or it turns out you're interested in medium popular culture, there is a short trailer for the class that I am going to be posting at the bottom of our class notes today that you might want to take a peek at. And if you have any questions, just let me know. But this class, English 221, is an overview of Shakespeare. So you can see that on our Moodle site, we've got several pieces at the top of our site that will be useful to you over the course of the semester. The first is Syllabus and Other Documents, and what I've posted in that particular area is what I'm going to be reviewing today, our syllabus and our course outline, so that you've got a general overview of what the class would be. So we're really not going to begin the course itself until our next class. I've also got assignment due dates. So while this is listed in the course outline, it also is something that you could just access and see immediately all of the due dates for everything in the course. And I've also got a folder for past class sessions. So what I will be doing is keeping the current week accessible for you to view. And then what I will do is I will post that in past class sessions so that you can always see the particular week that we happen to be on, but you can always refer to previous weeks. I've also got a discussion forum, and this is a way that we can try to duplicate some of the class discussion that we would be having, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I've also got an optional live chat, so if it turns out that you wanted to meet with me via chat, we could do so. And also what I am doing for the first time is holding in-person, but also Zoom office hours, and they're exactly at the same time. We'll see how that works. So you can see that's on Monday and Wednesday from 12 to 1, and Tuesday and Thursday from 9 to 10, or by appointment. So you can come see me in my office if you'd like, or you can visit me via Zoom, and if you were to click on that area on our Moodle site, that'll get you to my Zoom address. So you can see, if you're looking at the syllabus and other documents area, the syllabus begins by basically just giving some general information about the class, my name. Most people call me Lillian. I'm pretty informal, but call me whatever you feel comfortable with. My phone number, so you can always leave a message. My email, which is just my surname, no first initial, because when I started at GCC, we were just beginning to implement the email system, believe it or not. That would be in 1993. My office, North 328A, and again, my office hours. In terms of textbooks, one of the nice things about Shakespeare is that this is in public domain. So you can basically use any text. I recommend that you find a text that's got some good footnotes. I'm actually going to be talking a little bit more about this next class with some suggestions. I personally like the Riverside Shakespeare, but there are many options that are out there that you can choose. So in terms of the plays, I'll be talking about the specific plays that we'll be reading over the course of the semester before this class is over, so that you can also get a sense of which plays to purchase, though oftentimes what ends up happening is that you can get a version of Shakespeare that includes all of his works, even though we won't be talking about all of his works. And I've also got under a note that it's assumed that you'll have a good dictionary thesaurus for reference, which I assume you probably have loaded in your computer system, but having it and actually using it are two different things. So as a good writer, you want to be able to access both resources. So the course description. Basically, this class is a critical study of a selected group of plays by Shakespeare, because he wrote quite a few, so we won't have time to read them all. Approach by theme. The course will also give some attention to contemporary presentations or adaptations, because ultimately Shakespeare is meant to be performed. So the performance piece is just as important as the reading piece. So we will be exposed to both over the course of the semester. There is a prerequisite for this class, English 112, 114, or 116, what we call at GCC Composition 2, or Introduction to Literature. So if you think you haven't met that prerequisite at GCC or at another institution, please contact me. We could talk about what options are available for you. So under learning outcomes, you can see after successfully completing this course, this is what you should be able to accomplish. Number one, to appreciate Shakespearean drama as enjoyable, significant, and relevant. And even though Shakespearean drama is very old, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is not applicable to our times. And that's one of the reasons why we continue to read Shakespeare, because timeless and universal themes and concerns are addressed in his writing. And once we get accustomed to Renaissance English, I think you'll find a certain level of enjoyment associated with it. I've oftentimes said that Renaissance English is very similar to our modern day English. The difference, maybe about 10% or so. Almost like knowing a foreign language and knowing about 90% of that language. So once you become familiar with that percentage that is unusual in Renaissance English, I think you'll find the readings to go much more smoothly. But like anything else, it requires practice. So that's part of what this class is giving you practice reading this kind of language. And what I've found is that usually by the ending of the semester, students say that they feel much more comfortable reading. And in fact, they even ask, are the plays easier? And I say, no, actually, the plays are more complex by the end. But it's just your experience with Shakespeare is making things easier. So to learn how to read and understand Renaissance English is another objective in this class. And to examine the various types of Shakespearean drama, which we will talk about soon. That Shakespeare wrote different genres or categories. Some of his plays are comedies, some are histories, some are tragedies. Those are probably the best known. And some are known as tragic comedies, which happens to be a mix of two different genres. So we'll read representative plays from each of those areas, as well as Shakespeare's sonnets, and those are Shakespeare's poems. Identify major themes and issues in the dramas. You will see that oftentimes Shakespeare tackles very similar sorts of ideas in his plays. Recognize the relationship between Shakespearean plays and our present-day world, as I had indicated, and to improve oral and written communication skills, which I think is valid for any class. I certainly put that on all of my syllabi. I mostly teach English classes, but I also teach public speaking classes, and as I indicated, I also teach communications classes in media and popular culture, and I think that's important. The improving of oral and written communication skills in all of those disciplines, or in fact in every discipline at GCC. So English 221 offers a general introduction to the content and techniques of Shakespearean drama. We'll study, as I indicated, representative sonnets, comedies, histories, tragedies, tragic comedies. This course emphasizes critical thinking, critical reading, and critical writing. And it's something you've probably heard about in other classes. And critical isn't necessarily being negative or offering criticism, but it's analyzing and interpreting. Or in other words, asking a lot of questions. And I always think about the typical toddler filled with questions, particularly the question why. And I've oftentimes said that really is the point of college, is to begin asking the question why. Perhaps high school is about asking the question what, and then college is the more advanced level of trying to understand why, and oftentimes there isn't a very clear-cut answer. As a class, we'll strive to appreciate the aesthetic and literary merits of Shakespeare's work. In other words, there's a beauty associated with the use of the language. It's quite musical, as well as the storytelling associated with the plays. So, as we will discuss, the plays have poetry embedded within them, but they also forward a plot. So we've got a mix of techniques in Shakespearean plays. So procedures, how to do this. Normally we would have been meeting on Monday and Wednesday at 8 a.m. So perhaps it's best that we aren't meeting in person. What I will end up doing is posting a video much like this one of myself at the time our class would normally meet, actually before the time our class would normally meet. So you can expect to see a video every Monday and Wednesday at 8 a.m. And you'll have a 48-hour deadline to watch that particular video for that class and to answer the corresponding attendance question in our class discussion forum. So based on what I'm discussing in that particular class, I'll ask a attendance question, and your response will count as attendance for that particular class. So there is no right or wrong to the response. It's just a question of being present or not present. And this will be posted in our discussion forum, which allows you to see the responses of your classmates. And you're not required to respond to your classmates, but certainly you should read all of the responses, because this will give you an idea of the kinds of conversations we would have had in class. I kind of think of it in the way that I think about a real class interaction, where you might elect to volunteer something orally, or you might elect to just be quiet and listen. And I think both ways are very valid. So certainly if you feel moved to respond to one of your classmates' responses, you can do that. But I do expect you to read all of your classmates' responses, and I will respond to all of you so that you can read those responses as well. So again, we can get an idea of what would have happened during our class discussion. Any additional interaction, like I said, is pretty much up to you. Now, when we continue on, there will, of course, be written assignments in the class, and I'll talk a little bit more about them, things like journals and papers, and also a final exam. And I'm going to ask you to submit that to me to my email address when the time comes, because I've got a computer program that works best through email, via PDF, because that's how my grading program works. And then what I will do is put comments on them and return them back to you, to your email. Course requirements, pretty straightforward. Do all of the reading and writing assignments by the due date, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. You will submit periodic journal entries discussing your reactions to the readings that I'll talk about in a moment under the section of journals. Final exam, and the final exam will be an essay exam based on a cumulative review of everything we've talked about in the class, but it will also be open book, open notes, so you can access things like your journals and former classes and other resources. So basically, the best way to study for the final is to watch all of the videos and do all of the readings, because it's just a synthesis of everything that I would have been talking about. And you'll notice that below this video and below all of our videos, what I will post are notes which cover the major points of what I've discussed in a particular video. What I would have put, let's say, on a whiteboard or on a smart board if we were meeting in person. And if you have any special learning needs, please talk with me as soon as possible to discuss the assistance that would be most useful to you. So in the syllabus, there's a section entitled Response Journal, and I thought I'd read that to you and then talk a little bit about that. That reading and writing is an ongoing process, so the journals are meant as an opportunity for students to discuss their reactions to the readings. Guidelines will be very informal, as each student should use the journal as an opportunity to explore the literature in the way he or she feels would be most beneficial. You can almost think of it as a diary entry, but rather than talking about your personal life, you're talking about the readings. And some suggestions will be given in class, so I'll give you some ideas on how to proceed. But on the whole, the journal should reflect whatever relevant thoughts or questions, as we will soon discuss. Sometimes the questions are a lot more important than the answers that the individual student has about the readings. I think it's a good idea to do this right after you have completed your reading assignment while the ideas are still fresh. Though some students like to write down notes in their journal as they're reading, some students like to wait until they've been exposed to the class conversation and then write their journals, or some combination thereof. It doesn't much matter. The journals also provide an opportunity to brainstorm and free write paper topics. And when we get to the point of writing a paper, I will give you suggested paper topics. But you're also encouraged to create your own topic. And as long as I can approve it, then ultimately you can pursue it. So you can begin thinking right at the very beginning of the semester about ideas for papers, if you'd so like. And you can even brainstorm some final exam questions. Not that you can create your own final exam questions, but you might be able to anticipate what some of the final exam questions would be. And again, you can use your notes and other resources when you are answering the final exam questions. So I'll collect the journals on a regular basis and I will grade them informally. I'm not going to be reviewing them for grammar and mechanics, just for content. Think of it as a kind of conversation, but we're having it on paper, going back and forth. And they'll be graded informally, with an excellent being a plus, a good being a check plus, a satisfactory being a check, less than satisfactory, a check minus, unsatisfactory, minus. And in terms of late work, my policy is pretty similar for all late work. That late work will lower your grade by 1 full grade, and no late work will be accepted after 1 week has elapsed, unless you've made other arrangements with me beforehand. So if you need an extension, certainly ask for one. I'll be happy to grant it. And it's the same with the attendance questions as well. You have 48 hours to answer that in the discussion forum. But if it turns out that you can't make that particular deadline, just ask me for an extension. I'll be happy to grant it to you. So the idea behind the journals is that you've got maybe a page or so response to each of the major readings that we'll be doing over the course of the semester. But the journals can be as long or short as you'd like them to be. It's a way to encourage you to keep up with the reading, and it's also a way for you to begin talking about some of the themes and ideas that you've been exposed to in the reading. So it's more than just a book report or a plot summary. The assumption is that you already know the plot, but it's talking a little bit, not about what's happening, but why those things are happening. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about all of these assignments in greater depth as they become applicable, but I just wanted to give you a general overview of the course today. If you're reading along with me on the syllabus, you can see there's an institutional services disability statement, which I suspect you might be familiar with if you are taking other classes at GCC. That GCC values inclusion and equal access in its programs and activities. It's committed to fostering an environment of respect and full participation. So the goal is to create learning environments that are equitable, inclusive, and welcoming. There are aspects of the instruction or design of this course that results in barriers to your inclusion or accurate assessment or achievement. Please notify the instructor, me, as soon as possible. And if you're a student with a disability and you need reasonable academic accommodations, you can contact the Office of Disability Services, and you can see on the syllabus their contact information is listed, both their website and their phone. So attendance, which is a bit odd with an online class, but basically these videos are meant to serve as the kind of content that I would have been sharing with you in class. So watching the video and responding to it is in effect your attendance for that class. So class activity and discussion, because ultimately you will be talking about it in your class discussion forum, is important and can't be made up. So absences and tardiness will be negatively reflected in your participation grade. And I'll talk a little bit more about that participation grade in a moment. While each case is different, anything more than 2 absences could lower your grade, and excessive absences could result in failure. So again, if it turns out that you need additional time, I know we're living in very challenging times right now, certainly let me know and I'll be happy to grant you an extension. And you don't need to notify me if you're going to be absent once, but certainly if there's some sort of a pattern, then you need to let me know what's happening and why those things are happening. Consultations, you can meet with me during office hours or by appointment. Papers. There will be 2 papers over the course of the semester, one approximately midway through. So by that point, we would have had a good amount of time to talk about Shakespeare and some of his writings, and one towards the ending of the semester. And basically, I'm going to ask you to write approximately 4 to 5 pages, but it can be as long or as short as it needs to be. And I'm going to ask you to write a critical paper, which is not a research paper, so I'm not going to be asking you to do outside research. I'm going to ask you to analyze and interpret on your own based on what we've discussed in class. But that said, if you have your heart set on a research paper, let me know, because there's always room for negotiation. I'm going to ask that you submit the papers to my email, much like the journals, via PDF on the day specified. And the formatting of a paper is listed in the syllabus. Type, double space with 1-inch borders, pages numbered, and papers or should have cover pages that list the paper title, your name, the course and the section number, my name, and the due date. And hopefully this is something you've talked about in previous English classes, but we will also briefly discuss it when we get a little bit closer to the assignment. Late papers, much like late journals, would lower your grade by 1 full grade. No late assignment would be accepted after 1 week has elapsed unless you've made other arrangements beforehand. And be sure to keep a copy of any paper or any important piece of writing that you do for yourself. Paper assignments will be distributed throughout the semester, so I'll talk a little bit more about that as the semester progresses. And in terms of your papers, you have the option to revise the first paper, the one that's due approximately midway through the semester, because I know that oftentimes there's a little bit of uncertainty associated with the first paper. So I will review it, and this time I will review for grammar and mechanics, unlike the journals, as well as for content. And I will put a letter grade on it rather than a checkmark grade. And if you're content with your grade, you're done. But if you wanted to improve your grade, you could do a revision of your paper and incorporate my suggestions. And if you're still not sure how to proceed, you can always meet with me and I can give you further direction. And I ask that you hand in the original graded version with my comments along with your revision. And I would give you I would award you the higher of the 2 grades, which should be the revision. I've never had a revision that was a lower grade, though I suppose that's possible. And basically, I don't see my giving you any kind of unfair advantage by doing this. This is the way professional authors write. They go through lots of edits and they go through lots of reviews. So I think it's a wonderful way to think about writing, is about getting feedback and then incorporating that feedback into your writing. So everybody has the option of doing that, and that would be due by the ending of the semester. But the sooner you submit it, the better off everybody is. The idea is that you would have learned from the first paper, so you don't need to revise the second paper, which is due at the very ending of the semester. So there wouldn't be time to revise it. That said, I have had students who've made arrangements with me to hand in that second paper early enough so there is a possibility of revision, but it's something we would have to negotiate, unlike the first paper, which is available for the entire class to revise. There's a section on plagiarism that I'm going to skip and talk about next class, and go to the grading section, which is probably the section you are most interested in. 10% is participation, so that means attendance in class assignments and activities, etc. That means watching these videos, reading the notes posted below the videos, and answering the attendance questions. Journals are 15%. And one journal by itself isn't worth very much, but all of them together, and there are approximately, I think, 5 or 6 journals in the class, that would be 15%. Remember, I'm grading them informally on a checkmark system. Your first paper, which is due midway through the semester, and that is something you can revise for a higher grade, that's 25%. Your second paper, which would be due at the ending of the semester, that's 25%. And finally, that open book, open note final examination, the essay exam, would be 25%. So basically, slow and steady wins the race in this course. As you can see, for an A being an excellent grade, a B good, and a C satisfactory. And as I like to say, I don't like to discuss the letters that follow C in terms of evaluation on the first day of class. I think we can just focus on A, B, and C. I've also got, at the ending of the syllabus, criteria for essay evaluation about what an A basically encompasses, or a B or a C. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we have actually some writing assignments due. So what I wanted to do was to draw your attention to the course outline, which I have as a separate document in our Moodle folder under syllabus and other documents. And you can see that there's a disclaimer at the top. The dates and assignments may be subject to change, but we will finish everything by the ending of the semester. And assigned reading should be completed before the dates indicated. So this is giving you an idea of what it is I'm going to be discussing in class sessions. So you can see that week 1 today, the 24th, is purely introduction. Am I reviewing the syllabus and the course outline and welcoming you to the class, which is exactly what I would have done if we were meeting in person. And then our next class on the 26th, I wanted to talk a little bit about Shakespearean biography. Note that you don't have any readings assigned. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background about Shakespeare and his time period. And then in week 2, you can see that on Monday's class, I will talk more about Shakespeare's stage. So this gives you a little bit of time to prepare for the 2nd of February, which is when I will be discussing, or we will be discussing, I should say, Shakespearean Sonnets. And you can see that I've selected 6 sonnets for us to discuss. We have 2 classes devoted to discussing just those sonnets. They are Sonnet 15, Sonnet 18, Sonnet 20, Sonnet 127, Sonnet 130, Sonnet 151. As we will discuss, Shakespeare's sonnets do not have titles, so they're either referred to by the first line of the sonnet or by its number. And again, I'll be talking about some websites and places where you could find the sonnets if you wanted to, but any major Shakespearean text should be listing the sonnets at the ending. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of a taste of those sonnets to not only talk about Shakespearean poetry, but also to talk about Shakespearean language. So this is a way to kind of introduce us to Renaissance language. And then we begin with our first major play. That's going to be a comedy. And we think that Shakespeare wrote his comedies in the early part of his career, which is why usually courses begin with the comedies. We'll be reading 2 comedies, actually, the first being A Midsummer Night's Dream and the second being Much Ado About Nothing. And you can see that I've got multiple classes associated with Midsummer Night's Dream, and for all of the plays, and basically approximately 2 weeks for each play. What would be ideal, though I understand that the world isn't always ideal, but what would be ideal is that by the time we get to the first class that's listed for Midsummer Night's Dream, that's the 9th of February, that you would have read that play in its entirety. So that while we're talking about A Midsummer Night's Dream for the next 2 weeks, you are reading the next play that will be coming up in our course outline, which happens to be Much Ado About Nothing. And you would continue to do that throughout the semester. But again, I understand that life isn't always ideal. You may not necessarily be able to do that. But you can see that on the 9th of February is when we will have our first journal due. So by that time, we would have talked about journals. And that's on sonnets. So in other words, you have a journal due after we have talked about that particular thing in class, and then you can write about it so that it turns out that you can add your own commentary as well as reflections about what we discussed in class if you wanted to into your journal. So we've got 4 classes devoted to Midsummer Night's Dream. In between there, it turns out we have a holiday. On February 21st is President's Day, so there would be no classes. And we will not just read the plays, but also view a production and talk a little bit about the acting element, the performance element of Shakespeare. And then your journal for Midsummer Night's Dream won't be due until the 28th of February. By that point, we would have put closure onto Midsummer Night's Dream, while we as a class will have 2 weeks devoted to Much Ado About Nothing. And then we have a spring break, and that's on the 14th and the 16th of March. When you return from spring break, though you can always hand in assignments early, is when you would be handing in your 3rd journal, which would be about A Midsummer Night's Dream. And then what we would do after spring break is move from talking about Shakespearean comedies to talking about Shakespearean histories. And we're going to be reading one history play entitled Richard II as our example of a history plays. The history plays tend to be a little bit longer and a little bit more complex. So you can see that one of the things I have scheduled for us to do when we are reading Richard II is that you've got your first paper due, certainly, and that would be paper number 1 on comedy, but you wouldn't really have much to do outside of concentrating on Richard II if you've been devoting yourself to working on your paper over the course of the semester, rather than waiting till the very end, which is at the very end before you've got a due date, which is something that I'm going to encourage, because again, the histories tend to be a little bit more complex. And you can see that I've devoted an additional class to the histories. So we've got 2.5 weeks rather than 2 weeks for our history. And when we are done with Richard II, approximately the 6th of April is when you will be handing in your journal for Richard II. By that point, we will have moved into Shakespearean tragedy, probably what Shakespeare is best known for. And we will begin with Macbeth. And a little piece of trivia about Macbeth, this is Shakespeare's shortest play. So if it turns out that we start to fall behind, or just what's pretty typical at this point of the semester, people start to get a little tired, I think that this is a way that we can perhaps rejuvenate ourselves because, again, Macbeth is a very fast play. And we've got, again, 2 weeks devoted to Macbeth to talk about performance as well as to talk about the actual play itself. There happens to be a holiday embedded in there on the 18th of April. That's a Patriots' Day. No classes. Your journal for Macbeth will be due on the 25th of April. And by that point, we would have moved to our last Shakespearean tragedy for the semester. That happens to be Othello. We've got 2 weeks associated for that. And then journal number 6 for Othello would be due on the 9th of May, which leads us to the very last week of the semester. So I understand that's not really long enough to devote to an entire play, but I wanted to talk about tragic comedies, and specifically the play that I selected to represent tragic comedies happens to be The Tempest. And I'm actually assigning that play as an extra credit. It's not something that you actually have to read per se, but I will be talking a little bit about the significance of that. And you can do that play through extra credit in a couple of ways. You could submit in a journal. Note there isn't a journal assigned for The Tempest. You can also answer a final exam question about The Tempest as an extra credit opportunity. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So we've got our last week devoted to The Tempest, the tragic comedies, and just summing up. And our final exam, if we were meeting on Monday and Wednesday at 8 a.m., would be scheduled for Monday, the 16th of May at 8 a.m. So that's when I will be posting our final exam. And then you have 24 hours in which to respond to that final exam. You would have normally taken that final in a 2-hour block, but since we're meeting online, I'll give you a 24-hour block. But the final is not supposed to be nearly as developed or sophisticated as a paper. So you should devote approximately 2 hours to it. So it's not something you should be devoting 24 hours to. This is also the very last date in which you could hand in your second paper. And you can see that the first paper is devoted to comedies, so that would probably be A Midsummer Night's Dream or Much Ado About Nothing, though you might have the option of talking about a sonnet, but sonnets are a little bit different than plays, so it's a different kind of animal. So you'll need to adapt somewhat for writing a paper. For your second paper, you'd probably be talking about the history, which is Richard II, or you would be talking about the tragedies, which would be either Macbeth or Othello. That said, The Tempest is a possibility, even though we didn't necessarily discuss it in class, if you so wanted to pursue that. So that gives you a very broad overview of what it is that we would be doing over the course of the semester, with 3 quotes that I think pretty much summarizes Shakespeare and this class. One is by Gary Taylor, that says that Shakespeare's works have become our secular Bible. The second is by Roger Pringle, who states that Shakespeare's popularity is due to his extraordinary facility for language, his memorable characters, and his wonderful stories. And we'll talk about all of these over the course of the semester. And the third by Alexander Annext, who says, don't ask for simple answers from Shakespeare. Just believe in his ability to put into one play a whole world with all of its contradictions, contrasts, and problems. Because basically Shakespeare is trying to talk about the human experience, and the human experience is filled with contradiction, contrast, and problems. So again, we'll talk about all of these things in greater depth next class. Next class, I wanted to talk a little bit about Shakespeare's biography and also Renaissance England. And as I indicated at the bottom of our notes below, there is a 3-minute trailer about the class that I offer in horror film, if it turns out you are interested in taking an in-person class with me this semester. So I hope you're all doing well during these challenging times. I'm doing well, and we will continue on next class. For today's attendance question, basically, I'm going to just ask you to introduce yourself, which is what we would have done during the latter part of class if we were meeting in person in the discussion forum. And you can write as much or as little as you like. Feel free to upload video or pictures, but you're not required to. And hopefully this will give us a way to get a sense of who is in the class. Take care. We'll continue on Wednesday. Bye-bye.